Auditor Generals from G20 countries who are currently meeting at a summit in Johannesburg that's aimed at fostering collaboration between Supreme Audit Institutions in order to support their vital role in enhancing good governance. Speaking now is our very own AG in Tsakani Maluleke. Let's listen in.
Problem solving has served as a platform through which both developing and developed countries and economies in the world, representing 85% of global GDP, over 75% of international trade, and about 2/3 of the world population. These countries, these economies, these people have come together to not just make sense of the challenges that confront them in terms of their own countries, but also in the world stage, but to also put in place robust plans to mobilize and coalesce their collective resources to overcome those challenges and more strongly position themselves for enhanced socio-economic development and prosperity. This year, these nations gather on the African continent for the very first time under the banner of the G20. This is a time of no less tumult and peril in the affairs of the world, as those that served as the cauldron in which the G20 was originally forged. We are here today, along with the billions of souls that are represented by our presence, living through times of war, hunger, and unprecedented climatic disaster among the multitude of challenges confronting the world today. On this very continent, of 54 great countries, for instance, we find ourselves teetering precariously on the tightrope between harnessing opportunity and being overcome by calamity. On the one hand, we are blessed with the fastest growing youngest population, with 70% of the population on the African continent being under the age 30. We are endowed with 30% of the world's mineral deposits and over 65% of the world's uncultivated arable land. Yet, on the other hand, on this very continent, just last week, almost 80 people died in unprecedented floods in South Africa. Now, while this happens in the context of the worst floods ever seen in that region, as part of addressing government's disaster response, we need to think carefully about the future needs for infrastructure so that we can resist such climatic conditions and pressures and enable emergency responders to act quickly, effectively, and without delay. On this continent, just last month, the UN World Food Programme warned that millions of people were facing record levels of hunger as conflict, displacement, economic hardship, and repeated extreme weather pushed 50 million people across the world into extreme levels of food insecurity. Last year, it was reported that 35 million Africans had been displaced from their homes due to wars and climate, with a six-fold increase in climate disaster-induced displacements being experienced over the last 2 years. This is, of course, not a trend limited to our continent, but indeed a global challenge. Of greater concern is that these are not new problems. These are not new headlines. For decades, these reports of disaster have overshadowed the abundance of resources and opportunities that our continent has been endowed with. Let us be clear that these are not the problems of politics. They are problems that face humanity, as they impact each and every one of us. They are also not simply problems that manifest on stock exchanges, statistical reports, and statements of account. They are people problems that affect the health, livelihoods, capabilities, and quality of life of the citizens of our respective nations. They are not resource problems either, but rather a struggle with the allocation and efficient and effective use of existing resources towards the betterment of the people of our continent. More significantly, they are not just African problems, they are a microcosm of the challenges confronting, in one way or another, affecting all countries of the world, those represented here and beyond. It is for this reason that in his speech marking the commencement of South Africa's G20 presidency, His Excellency President Ramaphosa reflected on the challenges, stating that the world that we faced is confronted with severe challenges and crises, which were exacerbated by the fragility of global solidarity, crippling underdevelopment, and ever-deepening inequality. On this basis, he announced that the theme of South Africa's presidency would be solidarity, equality, and sustainability, leveraging partnerships across society and across the globe, and reigniting our common humanity, which is fundamental to the ethos of Ubuntu that binds us together as people of the world, to channel global collective energy towards confronting the challenges that we all face. It is within this context that the world seeks to navigate its way through the fraught and precarious conditions along the narrow path of opportunity and prosperity that we as Supreme Audit Institutions of the G20 nations have worked together over the past 7 months and now gather here today for this summit. We gather not as a mere appendix to the chapters of the G20, but we are living up to our promise, the promise we made to citizens when we as Supreme Audit Institutions agreed in Intosai P12 and also as the nations of the world agreed through the UN resolutions, that indeed the value and benefit of Supreme Audit Institutions is to make a difference to the lives of citizens. Therefore, to the extent that the G20 is seized with how to confront and overcome the challenges that face humanity today, and thus answer the question of what is required to make a difference to the lives of citizens, therein is the opportunity for SAIs to make an impact through our perspective, our experience, and our voice. We are uniquely positioned to provide relevant foresight, credible insight, and to enable oversight. We can influence key decision makers in government to optimize the use of public resources towards realizing the desired socio-economic development outcomes. For this reason, we have carefully and deliberately chosen key themes, 2 themes. 1, accelerating efforts to unlock and leverage public infrastructure funding for equality, sustainable growth, and bringing improvement to the lives of citizens. And 2, undertaking collaborative and integrative efforts towards bringing the skills gap for a future-ready workforce. We've done this because the critical success factors for a thriving and prosperous continent of Africa and the world at large are not in the adequacy of resources. The truth is, in many instances, plenty of those resources already exist. The trick is to harness and leverage these resources for the betterment of the lives of citizens. Central to our ability as nations to do that is our infrastructure and the skills and capabilities of our people. These factors are not just individually material to the success of our nations, but they are also mutually reinforcing. To the extent to which the skills of people of a nation can be leveraged, we've got to have adequate infrastructure that is available for service delivery, but also for proper economic activity. In building on the pioneering work of the SAIs of Indonesia, India, and Brazil, who have laid the strong foundation upon which we stand today as we begin the summit, we as SAI South Africa have anchored our SAI20 chairmanship on 3 key strategic imperatives that we believe concern the current and future positioning and relevance of the SAI20 engagement platform and ought to preoccupy our collective thoughts. The first one is about affirming and reinforcing the legitimacy and relevance of SAI20 as a G20 engagement group. The Establishment of SI20 naturally raised questions about the relevance of an engagement group of Supreme Audit Institutions. Some have asked whether there was indeed a legitimate role for them in the G20 program. And these are all fair questions. Our collective work over the last 7 months in preparing for SI20 this year have fairly and definitely answered these questions. We've managed to do so in our analysis of the 2 themes on infrastructure and skills development, and we've managed to demonstrate that there is indeed a legitimate role for SAIs in deliberating on matters of global socio-economic development. You see, SIs are not just good for reporting after the fact on historical information. They also serve as indispensable sources of strategic foresight, insight, and they enable appropriate, optimal, effective, quality decision-making by those that run our respective governments. In particular, we've managed to highlight how the unique mandate, the capabilities, and the vantage point that we have as Supreme Audit Institutions position us to support our nations in addressing the key stumbling blocks to progress. These themes of infrastructure and skills development, along with the challenges and indeed opportunities that relate to them, have featured consistently and prominently on the agenda of the G20 since it began. In some respects, the world has made progress, but in others, the backlogs and the deficits only persist, and sadly, they continue to grow. The challenge has not been the why or even the what needs to happen, but rather it's been about the how. It has not been about the lack of knowledge and resources that has held the world back, but rather the challenges of how we need to do what we're supposed to do in our respective countries as well as a global community. So this year, by focusing our work on the particular factors that have driven the unrelenting persistence of these challenges, we've tapped into our unique expertise and capabilities, particularly relating to having the whole of view on resource allocations, flows and utilization, as well as risk management, so that we can surface recommendations that governments and Supreme Audit Institutions can apply as they aim to unlock the much-needed accelerated progress towards the realization of the goals that deal with these particular areas of development. We believe wholeheartedly that this is indeed the role that SAIs are made to play in our societies. The second aspect of what we believe ought to preoccupy our collective thoughts over the next few days is about how we position SI20 as a necessary and relevant complementary platform to other international platforms of SAIs, particularly in the inter-SI community. The question has arisen around how SI20 could be a duplication, perhaps, or whether it is causing fragmentation in the global community of SAIs. Our view, having done the work over the last 7 months and having considered the outcomes of previous SI20 engagements, our view remains that SI20 presents a unique opportunity for us to come together.
All right, so you're listening there to the Auditor General of South Africa, Tsakani Maluleke, opening this meeting of G20 Auditors General currently underway in Johannesburg. She's really crafting, if you like, the geography of what this meeting ought to focus on, given the myriad challenges faced by not only by the countries represented at that meeting, but also by the world generally speaking. She's spoken about the interesting times we live in insofar as the conflicts are concerned, but also honed in on the flooding that's really rocked parts of the Eastern Cape over the past couple of days, where now we know close to 100 people have died. Insofar as that is concerned, she says G20 Auditors General need to start thinking about the future of infrastructure and the needs of these communities.